Our final speaker this afternoon is the Dean of the Haas Business School, Tom Campbell. He will be introduced by a faculty member of Haas, Jihong Sanderson. She is not only a faculty member at Haas, but also Executive Director of the Center for Research on Chinese and American Strategic Cooperation. And that works heavily in the IPR area, so I think this is a nice segue from the previous panel. In addition, she teaches at numerous Chinese Executive MBA and Technology Executive Training programs in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. And she will say a few words about her work before introducing our final speaker. Jihong, thank you.
Thank you, Campbell. Okay. Yesterday in Beijing, China's Premier Wen Jiabao presented a dramatic speech to the National People's Congress, in which he indicated that the huge amount of investment in modernizing China will be diverted into two new directions. One will be improving and protection natural environment. Another will be increase social justice, democracy, and education for the 1 billion rural citizens of China. So, in this time of dramatic changing in China, efforts such as BCI will have most, I think, a critical important impact on China's investment. It is my really pleasure to be participating in today's BCI's conference. So for that, I would like to take a minute to give my special thanks to Tom Gold, Richard Palmer, Camille Crescenton, and my friend George Cole for their support and encouragement to my work at Berkeley connecting to China. And following by Camille's suggestion, I would like just take a minute to report what I'm doing at UC Berkeley. And I'm a faculty member at Haas School of Business and teaching the course Management of Technology Doing Business in China. And I also direct China Fellowship Program each year at Haas. And most recently, I'm focusing on building this Center for Research on Chinese and American Strategic Cooperation, in which we plan to train the Chinese leaders, including judges, legislators, business leaders for intellectual property protection. And I think if any of you are interested in, and we can talk about that later on. So, as you said, this is a typical example of Berkeley is building a relationship to China's government and the business leaders. And again, my great thanks to our deans across campus, Dean Li, Dean Shell, and Dean Anthony Saxenian, and others for their support and help with this cross-campus effort. So I personally indebted to Haas School of Business and its Dean, Tom Campbell, for his support and efforts to help build bridges of understanding, knowledge, and cooperation with China. And this afternoon, it is my great honor to introduce Dean Tom Campbell, a person whose integrity and accomplishment make him outstanding in any group, even one so distinguished as this. Dean Tom Campbell has earned both PhD in economics and a JD in law, and is a recognized expert on public policy. During his 5 terms as a U.S. congressman and one as a state senator, he played historical role as a champion of individual rights, environmental protection, responsible budgeting, ethics in business and government, and a fight to expand legal immigration. Perhaps the one I'm able to be here today. One reason. He led the fight against unconstitutionally wages a war and the effort to bring U.S. intellectual property rights law into the digital age, two issues which really very close my heart. And Dean Campbell is an extremely busy person. In addition to his regular duties, he recently authored the book, Separation of Power in Practice, chaired the World Affairs Council of Northern California, and served as a California State Budgeting Director. The 4 years under Dean Campbell's visionary strategic leadership have been a golden age for Haas School of Business, with plans to increase faculty by 50%, increase career and technology services to students, and to erect a new building to be shared with the School of Law. Now, as they say in Chinese, 让我们欢迎 Campbell 院长给我们讲话. Please join me welcome Dean Tom Campbell.
Thank you, Jihong. If I were really talented, I'd understand that last sentence. But I assume it was complimentary because you are a diplomat. First of all, I wish to say I am the third dean who is involved in the enterprise today. John Lee and Orville Schell, my colleague deans, really deserve the heavy praise, and Annalise Saxenian. So I should say I'm the fourth dean. And I was given the opportunity to close. So this is an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about the importance of the China perspective on the Berkeley campus and the business school in particular. I want to, however, begin by recognizing an old colleague, Stanley Lubman, who is here from when we were both on the faculty of Stanford Law School. This may be the only group where I can say Stanford on the Berkeley campus without getting hissed. I thought I could, but I was wrong. I also want to say thanks to Morgan Stanley and Cisco Systems for helping to sponsor, and to our advisory board member, Dalin Shu, who is here and participated as well. We're delighted that you are on our board of advisors. Dalin has served for many years on the Haas School Board of Advisors. Second thing I wanted to mention was last October, the Clausen Center in International Public Policy and Business hosted a conference involving doing business in China, India, and Russia. The executive director of that program was my wife. So I get to brag about Suzanne as well. Her farsightedness was evident in her placing China foremost in that program. And next autumn, the Clausen Center will follow that with a program explicitly on intellectual property, doing business overseas. So once again, we expect the issue of IP to come to the forefront, though it won't be exclusively in those three countries. At the presentation last October, the example of China, both positive and negative, was very important to the discussion. The General Counsel and Executive Vice President of Callaway Golf came and made a presentation on the examples of piracy regarding the heads of drivers made in China, and how the Chinese trade officials, having been drawn attention to this fact in Shanghai, held a very big publicized event wherein the counterfeit golf clubs were cut in two, the heads severed from the rest of the golf club. The presentation was not lost on Chris Israel, who is the Bush administration's designated official for intellectual property protection overseas. So we look forward to further focus on the issue of business in the world, business in China in particular, as this conference continues in October. Jihong mentioned in her introduction that she has been involved with an initiative of great importance, and I wanted to take just a moment and emphasize it. We are collaborating with the law school, so the Haas School of Business and Bolt Hall School of Law, in a program for this autumn wherein we hope to offer executive education for Chinese intellectual property officials. Jihong Sanderson is using her excellent contacts in China in order to offer this course in world standards for IP. And I think it's an excellent step that the Haas School and Bolt can do together in accommodating such an important area of interest to all sides in the world, but particularly to the United States and China. The third thing I wish to mention is the long-term strategic plan for the Haas School of Business includes China very prominently. First of all, as is obvious from today's conference, Berkeley is exceptional in drawing across many different disciplines. The International Area Studies program, the law school, the business school, the School of Information Management Systems in particular. We are now in our third year of the Management of Technology China Fellowship Program, which is a joint venture between the business school and the engineering school. It was created for, and also SIMS, excuse me, the Information Management School. It was created in order to place fellows in China to study high-tech business development on a short-term visit every year in January. This year, as in the last two, we are successful in sending 10 fellows to China for that purpose, and we are interested in even more such collaborations. The Haas faculty is blessed now with almost 10% capable of fluency in Mandarin. Well, I suppose all of us are capable, but I should say who are fluent in Mandarin. And that number is likely to increase. One of the initiatives that I discussed with Dalin in particular is the opportunity to create an endowed chair on our faculty where a criterion will be fluency in Mandarin. That does not violate Proposition 209 because it simply deals with the proficiency and not particularly any origin of a national origin or ethnic origin. We have more foreign students at the Haas School from China and Taiwan than from any other locations on the planet. And because the foreign students typically pay a higher tuition than domestic students, we are very grateful for the support that has been given for scholarships, including particularly Dong Ku Kim and the Jennifer Maxwell. I'm going to take just a second on each. Dong Ku Kim established a series of scholarships to help those MBA students who could not obtain loans on their own. Largely, an MBA student can obtain a loan if that MBA student is an American citizen. But non-citizens cannot obtain a co-signing, cannot obtain a loan typically from an American bank without co-signing by an American. And so our generous contributors have made up the difference. In particular, Mr. Kim, an American of Korean origin, and Sally Maxwell. Sally and her husband established the Power Bar Company. He passed away tragically at a young age, and always reflected positively, and in Sally's memory, in his memory, has now established a scholarship to help those who cannot otherwise obtain loans, which once again helps the foreign students. We are interested in expanding our education in the executive field, particularly with China. We see that as a huge opportunity for learning and for making our curriculum quite relevant and topical to the challenges of doing business in the world, and particularly with China, through executive education, so that we know what the companies and individuals doing business particularly want to learn. So far, we have had a limited number of joint ventures with Chinese universities. This is not because we have not been asked. It's because we've decided to be very cautious, to proceed with such linkages only where we thought we could have very good quality control. We are very interested in preserving the top quality name that the Haas School of Business and Berkeley has. We have a joint venture in general in prospect with several Chinese universities, but none so intimate as has been established by Harvard or Wharton. And we don't believe that we will be going that route. Rather, we will be going the specific topic route, at least for the near future. We are the smallest of the top 10 business schools. We're presently ranked number 6 by U.S. News. And to break into the top 5, we think we should emphasize specialty, and specialty, particularly given our location and the depth of our faculty with China, makes all the sense in the world. I wanted to close then with a few personal comments, and then I get to gavel the meeting to a close. In my 5 terms in Congress, I was never senior enough to be chairman, so I can be chairman today and exercise the gavel. But first of all, Ji-Hong was kind enough to mention my action when I was a member of Congress on visas. Let me simply say this is in America's interest to expand the H-1B visa program to guarantee its survival and application to the areas of technology where we can most benefit. There are many voices in Congress today calling for limitations on immigration. That is hugely short-sighted. America will continue to progress competitively as we draw from the best minds that the world has to offer. Without necessarily endorsing it, because it does involve a mixture of different jurisdictions, let me share with you Scott McNeely's proposal. Scott is the CEO of Sun, that upon receiving a PhD in electrical engineering or chemistry or any of a number of applied advanced hard sciences at University of California, that the recipient of any such degree have a green card stapled to the back of the diploma. As I said, that involves mixing jurisdictions and hence poses very interesting legal questions. It is, however, a very interesting, a very powerful suggestion of the importance of having a vibrant, welcoming H-1B program. I also briefly want to mention that when I was in Congress, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, the relations across strait, Taiwan, China, occupied a substantial amount of my time. I was privileged to visit both Taiwan and China, and I will simply raise a bit of concern. The optimistic outcome is also the most likely, in my view. It still continues to be. Sadly, however, the affairs of humankind are not always the most optimistic. And what I'm most troubled by is, on both sides of the strait, the political attractiveness of using the Taiwan issue to help domestic politics. This is playing with fire. And so to the extent those in the room, well, I'm sure those in the room are far more influential than I in these areas, I might simply pass along that the Congress of the United States was, when I was a member of the House, acutely concerned about and interested in dampening the buildup of weapons and the continuing pushing of the border. When I was there last, when I was in Taiwan last, I was informed of a number of occasions on which the Chinese Air Force approached the midpoint between the Taiwan Strait, causing Taiwan's Air Force to scramble to respond, because once they go beyond the midpoint, the time to respond is too short. That is a dangerous endeavor, which is not beneficial to either side. And lastly, since I've just come close to a little bit of politically touchy subject, let me conclude by saying how pleased and happy I am to live at this time, hopefully I'll live for a few more years, at this time when we have seen such a change. And so I'll conclude with a personal observation. When my wife and I were married in 1978, I was living in Chicago, she was living in Washington, D.C., and I proposed a honeymoon in Wisconsin, that being as far from home as I intended to go. I thought the Dells in Wisconsin would be an appropriate place for a honeymoon. My wife suggested China instead, so we went to China. And in 1978, we visited Guilin, Guangzhou, and Nanning. We were one of the first groups to go into Guilin that included Americans. We went before the United States and the PRC had recognized each other. And in Guilin, we noticed a substantial hubbub in the one hotel as people were carrying large items up to the 7th floor. Well, I knew that these large items were too big to fit on the plane that I took, so I asked and found out that there was a congressional delegation visiting. And this was 1978, long before I ever thought I might be in Congress. Well, it turned out this was the congressional delegation preparatory to recognition. And they were over there for the purpose of smoothing the way, with recognition coming just a few months thereafter. I went up to the 7th floor, the elevators opened, and there was a gentleman with a machine gun. So I assumed that this meant security was particularly high on the 7th floor for a reason. and that I had one of two options. I could either lose face and immediately go back down or get out and pretend I was with the delegation. Showing attributes which eventually led me to run for Congress, I was pushy. Got out, walked out, the guard nodded, and I walked down the corridor. Now I'm walking down the corridor with absolutely no idea where I'm going. The door opens up, a gentleman steps out, and he says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Hi, I'm Tom Campbell from Chicago." And he said, "I'm Pat Leahy from Vermont." I said, "Well, we're up here to check whether they're giving VIPs any better rooms than we have." So he welcomed us in and found out that the only difference between the rooms was there was one rug on the floor in the one hotel in Guilin. That was 1978. It was, however, the honeymoon capital of China, and I suspect still is, because of the beauty of the mountains. On that same trip, we visited Nanning, and when our train went through Nanning, the guards pulled the shades because there was military activity. Those of you who know the short-term history will recognize that in January of '79, war broke out between China and Vietnam, and Nanning was the staging area. And lastly, Guangzhou. So we visited Canton, and I can only tell you, those of you who were there before I, and I know there are many, in 1978, the bicycles ruled the city. How much better for the environment and for the world if that perhaps had not only continued the case in Guangzhou, but also been emulated throughout the world. So from personal observation from 1978 forward, I'll conclude with one last one just to say how pleased I am with the welcome I've always had in China, how strongly important the Chinese area of study, collaboration, and development is for the Haas School of Business and for Berkeley, how we reach across various schools on the Berkeley campus, and particularly with our friends in engineering and SIMS and areas, international area studies, to leverage the strength that Berkeley has in international study and in particular in the study of relations with China. So the last anecdote is this one with which I end. Our flight from Chicago to Hong Kong on our honeymoon was delayed. When we got to the Empress Hotel, our rooms had been given away. Well, you know, you're newly married, you want to be very impressive, you want to tell your wife that you are a man of the world, un homme des affaires, even if you can't speak a word of Cantonese. Well, it didn't matter, of course. We got to the Empress Hotel, and the gentleman said, "I'm very sorry, given away. But we have taken the liberty of booking you for no extra charge in the peninsula." So naturally, my statement was, "Well, is it as good?" And the gentleman gave me about the best possible answer, which was so nice because he saved my face. He says, "I'm sure the gentleman and his new bride will be very happy." So my first visit to China was to Hong Kong, and a limousine picked us up at the Empress, took us to the peninsula, and you just can't improve on that as a honeymoon memory. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much, Dean Campbell. That was really wonderful. And I want to thank you all for sharing just a really exciting day with us today. I want to conclude by recognizing our sponsors once again, Morgan Stanley, and especially Dick Palmer. Dick, I would like it if you could come up to the podium, please. Dick has been just tireless in organizing this conference. He was a true impresario, and we'd like to recognize you with that. He assembled just such a stellar group to speak with us today. I also want to recognize and thank Tom Garvey from Cisco Systems. Is extremely helpful. UC Berkeley International and Area Studies also provided a lot of backup and logistical organization, and I especially want to recognize Jillian Edgelow, who also just pulled everything together. I invite you all to stay for a reception afterwards. We have some wine and cheese. It would be a wonderful time. If you have any questions about the Berkeley China Initiative, I would be very pleased to answer them. Tom Gold, our Associate Dean, is also available. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you next time.